Buenas tardes. My name is Debbie Brown. I'm the president of Colorado Business Roundtable, and we're very excited to welcome you to this panel talking about the private sector's role in strengthening our regional economies. And I'm joined by three of my colleagues here that also run roundtables in their respective states: Tennessee, Texas, and Minnesota, and also joined by Emilio Cadena, who you know as the chairman of the U.S.-Mexico Foundation. If you'd like to see more about their bios, of course, they're all in the app that you have on your phone, and we're excited that you're here to talk about the private sector. Before I kick off with some questions, how many of you are in the private sector? Would you define yourself? Okay, so most of the room. Anybody here from academia? Just curious, or the nonprofit community? Okay, great, welcome. Then I'm talking to an audience who probably knows instinctively that the private sector needs to be engaged when we talk about all the issues that affect our countries, Canada, Mexico, and the United States. We believe through my organization, and I think I'm not alone, that business is a force for good. The private sector not only creates jobs, they strengthen economies by providing capital, providing opportunities, providing innovation, but are really the heart of what drives any economy. We need to have a strong private sector. So many of us on the panel represent employers in the United States, thousands of employers that represent a lot of different employee interests, but we're excited to talk about the intersection of the North American way today. Particularly pleased that we have Emilio pinch hitting on the panel to give a perspective as well with the U.S.-Mexico Foundation. So with that, I want to kick us off, and if you had a chance to answer our poll question, we might get to that at the end, talking about what are the biggest hurdles that you're seeing in terms of business and how we need to work to strengthen our economies. So to kick us off, I want to start with Pat, who is the president of the Tennessee Business Roundtable. Pat, how do organizations like ours, business roundtables, play a role in advocating for policies and initiatives that drive economic growth?
Well, thank you, Debbie. I'll give two answers to that, and I think there are things that we do for the business community, and there are things that we do for the broader community. First, for the business community, business organizations like all of ours, we serve our companies, who are members of our organizations, and we do that by taking on a role of an organizer, a leader, an expert, a defender, an advocate for the business community in our states. And we do this, why do we do this? Because individual businesses may not have the know-how about how to advocate for themselves effectively, especially with government decision makers. They may not have the time or the resources to do it for themselves, to advocate for themselves. And they may not want to be out in front. They may not want to be seen as self-interested or to expose themselves to reputational risk or criticism that might come along with standing up for yourself. So we as business organizations can sort of take the heat for them, and we do that by organizing people and information and data and financial resources and bringing that all to bear on behalf of our members. The other thing I really do want to say, which is almost as important, is that I think business organizations like ours also do our thing to serve the public good, not just our own businesses. And we do that by way of serving business and by also informing the media and the government and the public by bringing knowledge and ideas to the forefront. One way that we do that I think is very important is that business organizations can take a role especially in filling knowledge gaps that may exist among those other stakeholders. You might refer to them also as blind spots. And some of those stakeholders have several types of blind spots. They may have a geographic or local blind spot, meaning they may not be able to see too far beyond their own community. They may not have an understanding of what happens outside of it. They might have a business knowledge gap or blind spot where they may not see businesses at all. They might be very much hooked into their own thing. They may not understand how business operates and what the effects of policy decisions are on business and why that should be important to them. They may have a functional or a sector blind spot. Yeah, we see this sometimes with executive branch agencies where they're focused very specifically on regulating health or regulating insurance or regulating some other aspect or policy making in those areas, and they may not be able to know or see that there are outside effects to the decisions that they take. So we help those other stakeholders as business organizations. We help them understand and accept the value that business delivers. We help them understand the practical and local effects of policy choices. We help them with the big picture, putting all the pieces together about the long-term economic effects, especially of policy choices. We give them facts and support that they need to choose well and to think clearly about the business community.
Thank you, Pat. And I think it's interesting, when I first invited Pat to come to the forum with us, and he's not in a border state, I think it's just interesting thinking about the North American way. Many of our states are very committed to understanding how we can be better regional partners, and that was certainly Pat's inclination to come as well. But I want to jump in with Justin, who is the president of the Texas Business Roundtable, and he, of course, operates on a border state. And when we think about thriving economies, there's a lot of forces in play, Justin. Academia, business, community, and government, but government can only do so much in incentivizing growth. How do you see businesses stepping into those gaps, particularly in driving trade policies that benefit both local and regional economies?
Yeah, thanks, Debbie. And I was when you asked this question to Pat, I thought, well, maybe I'll jump in. But Pat, that was a great answer. We have 27, 28 states have groups like ours around the country, and that was a great answer about the overall mission of these organizations. While we have some differences, we all have that same mission. The way, in terms of, to your question, Debbie, in 2016, in January of 2017, when Donald Trump was sworn in as president, he called NAFTA the worst trade deal in history, and Texas very much depends on free trade and not having tariffs between our neighbor and our partner, both to the south and north in Mexico and, of course, in Canada. So that was a wake-up call for us. We, at the time, were the only state in the United States with a trade surplus with Mexico. Every other 49 had a little bit of a trade deficit. People take that as a talking point when you don't realize the enormity of how much those economies and all other 49 states had grown because of NAFTA and the trade with Mexico. So whether that was a talking point that we were concerned about as well. But fortunately, we had many states join us. We had our members up there in terms of business leaders. In 2018, I believe, I took 9 trips to Washington with some of our members and walked the halls and made sure. And at the end of the day, we were able to get all of the Texas delegation, both Republican and Democrat, to vote for USMCA. So it's critical. I think you have to have business has to play a role. If they're not, they're leaving it to to others. But earlier there was a panel discussion where one of a Texan who works for a bank has been incredibly effective both with NAFTA and and also with USMCA, and in 2026 we'll need him again, but we'll need everybody. So whether you're Mexico, United States, or Canada, I just encourage business leaders businesses to get together and make sure that those who are making this what we hope will be a review and not more, make sure they understand. And I understand there are some complicated areas, but without the voice of business. Now, I do want to add though that we have one of our good colleagues is in Massachusetts, and I've told him before, as he said it to me as well, that we're in the same country but in different worlds. And so in Texas, our state government actually is very committed and does a lot with economic development and growth, but they're also very certain to work with the business community, the Business Council, the Texas Association of Business, manufacturers. They want to hear and work together with that information, and not saying other states don't, just that we're very fortunate, but that comes from business leaders putting pressure on elected leadership. So.
Absolutely. And I want to turn it over to Kurt. I think he's at the tail end over there to give some feedback from the state of Minnesota. There's a lot of headquarters in Minnesota, which he likes to remind us that's a headquarters state. And when we think about this political dynamic, it's not just around the USMCA, but of course, a lot of talk in the political escalation at the moment on tariffs, immigration, trade policies, and of course, the U.S. is in the middle of presidential election. Some of these really bring about broader policy discussions around protectionism versus globalism, and how do we see strategies for the U.S. to remain not only competitive and resilient in an evolving political landscape, but how do we get through some of these election cycles and still have the predictability and certainty that businesses require. So Kurt, in that line, especially with these headquarters that are really predominant in your state, how do you view the North American way? How do you view some of these topics in terms of the shifting political realities?
Yeah, thank you, Debbie. And thank you for the opportunity and for attending as well. So yes, I'm the other end completely of the spectrum, right? I'm up by Canada. It's still cold up there. It is nice. They'll come visit. But USMCA, and especially, and I grew up on a farm in North Dakota, so trade and agriculture has been a part of my life since I was a kid. And my family still farms up in North Dakota. But those, and each one of those individual topics is what makes it significant for us. So our membership includes 17 Fortune 500 companies, including big, giant brand names you'd know very well: Cargill, Target, Best Buy, General Mills, U.S. Bank, Wells Fargo, all headquartered in Minnesota. And it's not just because of our fantastic weather. That's a joke, because it's cold there in the winter.
It is.
Yeah. But it's the corporate climate. And to Debbie's point, we've actually renamed ourselves America's Headquarters Economy. And it's not because my friend Justin represents America's football team, but the mix that we have in Minnesota, where you have, and by the way, we have MedTech, Boston Scientific, the folks at Medtronic. So that mix is very, very unique to Minnesota. And so when some of these individual trade deals or tariffs or conflicts come up, where it may be a little bit easier for some of our commodities to get overseas because it's a tough time, bad crop, an area of development needs a lot more food. On the other side, then some of our med devices or some of the tariffs on that because of another trade agreement. A lot of those things in and of itself for one state would be a problem. Because of the dynamic we have in Minnesota, we are able to ride it out, but we're also able to see them from that 50,000-foot view, not on the ground. You lose a manufacturing plant in a small town in Indiana or Ohio, that's a big deal, and a lot of people lose not only their livelihood, but they may have to move to another state. So what makes it unique from Minnesota's perspective is we look at it from that standpoint. And we're blessed. We have Senator Klobuchar, one of the probably, my opinion, one of the best on not only foreign trade, but what U.S. and Minnesota's role is in the global, especially the global business climate, but what Minnesota's role is. So I think, excuse me, to the greater point then, I think, Debbie, it's honestly, it's about, and that what we're seeing in a couple of our big Minnesota companies, Polaris, General Mills, Cargill, are reshoring, but they're reshoring here to Mexico or in Western Canada. That to me, I think, especially and you see with the shipping strike that's going on now and some of the tariffs that are coming through, that to me is actually really great news. I don't mind if it's Canada, I don't mind if it's Mexico, we'd love to have it back in Minnesota, but that reshoring to North America is something we promote. We, not only just as member companies, but as a trade association, that's what we want to see. Bringing that volatility for not only for our businesses, but then for the consumers is really, really important. I spent time in politics and in business, and the one thing I've learned, especially in business, is business likes to avoid uncertainty and risk. And if every political season you get a new crop of legislators or a new Congress or a new president, and the change is, well, what we did 2 years ago, we're going to completely go the other way. Well, business doesn't like that kind of risk and uncertainty. So what we as trade associations, and me in particular, is to help elected officials say, we understand where you'd like to go. Here's what we're already doing. how can we work that way together? Collaboration versus conflict, or, well, we're all the same party. We're just going to go out and cut all the taxes or raise all the taxes. I think bringing the collaborative process now more than ever, especially as the world is getting even more out of control and a lot more, in some cases, even caustic, it's better for us to have and I like the idea of having North America be a strong place and a steady place for our corporations not to really come back to, but to expand in.
Mm-hmm. Kurt, that's a great point. I feel like that's one of the biggest roles the business community can actually play is when there's so much division in our political world, whether it's U.S. politics, regional politics, business can have a moderating tone and try to strive for that predictability and certainty that you mentioned. And I will just put a plug in for, I think I'm going to start calling Colorado the U.S. headquarters, but with sunshine and skiing and mountains, and see if we can steal some of those companies away from Minnesota one of these days. But that's a great segue into Emilio. And I will tell you, I've had the pleasure of hosting Emilio in Colorado, speaking at a View from the Top event that we do every year with CEOs. And it was a global theme, and just really appreciated the chance to get to know you better, Emilio, in our home state. And it was a great segue into issues around nearshoring and some of the changes we've seen, of course, with COVID and the different escalation of geopolitical issues that we're seeing around the world. It really just makes sense to lean in more to our friends that we have that are so nearby. So I'm going to shift a little bit, Emilio, because you've had the chance to speak with so many people over the course of the last couple of days. How does that sit with you? What are you seeing? Do you have any new conclusions, perhaps, around partnerships that you've seen between these three countries?
I think that there is a strong belief that we have to be together. I think that kind is out there. I'm not sure we exactly know how to do it. And I think this is one of the big problems of the private sector and the organized private sector, like we are here. I say I'm part of the Mexico's Coordinating Business Council. I'm part of the board of American Chamber of Commerce. And of course, I'm chairman of the board of the U.S.-Mexico Foundation. But I think we still haven't adapted well to a significant shift on the political and social environment. I think we haven't changed substantially well our narrative on why together. And I think especially it's about storytelling, not about data, because I think of all of you said, the data supports the integration. If we are not together, we don't have the capital, the innovation, the demographics, the natural resources. Canada is huge for us on that. But the data is not enough, because data doesn't win elections, unfortunately, not anymore. And I think, and again, I make this disclosure, this is the place I want to live. And I love living in Mexico. I love skiing in Colorado and all of this, but I love being in Mexico. But we need to understand that the environment has changed. And I think this is still something that we are not 100% on board, and that the narrative that we used 10, 15 years ago it doesn't work anymore. Actually, in 2016, when we started to look at the renegotiation of USMCA, actually the first thing we did was visit Governor Abbott with a delegation here from Mexico and from Consejo Mexicano de Negocios and CCE. We went there to visit with Abbott. But we need stories. We need the stories on why this makes sense, the story of the transformation of Laredo, Texas, for example, right? Or the transformation of, some of the agricultural states in the United States selling their barley to Constellation Brands. There's Stephanie from Constellation Brands making Mexican beer that then is consumed in the United States and generates 10 more jobs for every job that is generated in Mexico. So I think that's the challenge that we're seeing today. If you ask me on my lessons learned is, I think we are convinced, certainly this group, but we need to elaborate a better storytelling. And this is when we thought about the North Capital Forum. We needed a different place where we could actually talk about the relationship and hopefully come up with ideas. Because I think it's also, that's part of the risk of these events is we're here for 2.5 days. We talk about fantastic ideas, but then not really good execution. And I think that's maybe the transition that I believe that organizations such as yours and such as the ones I'm part of, we have to be more, we have to be better at executing some of these strategies, and especially, in my opinion, storytelling. And I think the biggest story that we haven't told, that I think is lost, honestly, I certainly speak from the Mexican point of view, but I think I saw it when we were renegotiating USMCA, is I think we need to tell the story again on how good companies are for the community. I think we have been perceived and pictured as the bad guy of this movie. I don't know how we ended up on this side of the
right.
equation, but we are fantastic for communities. We transform communities. We pay well, or we pay some of us really well, some of us so. But the indirect impact of businesses, it's like, what would be this area of Mexico City without businesses? And I think we need to again tell people, not through politicians directly, that we are a great member of the community.
Yeah,
Can I add to that, Debbie?
Yeah, please do.
Yeah, and literally the timing couldn't be perfect. We have our annual dinner a week from today, so 1,000 people coming in, and we talk about the same thing: headquarters economy. So most of our members have over 1,000 employees and $1 billion in revenue. That's the biggest of big business, right? And instead of talking about how great it is to have Target in there, we're going to this year talk about the 500,000 Minnesotans who work for those member companies. And it's easy when you're in political discussion, I hate big business, they get paid too much, they don't pay enough in taxes. But, and this is what one of our CEOs said, but their granddaughter gets a job at 3M as an engineer. What do you see on Facebook? Oh my gosh, we're so proud. My daughter's going to go work as an engineer for 3M. My son is in marketing at Target. Can you imagine how proud we are? And that's the story we're missing. Big business that gets paid really well, maybe not so much. But the story and what we want to leave and what we want to leave our group with next week is that pride in their son, grandson, daughter, niece, nephew getting the job for that iconic company. That's the message, to your point. And the community, half of the Boys and Girls Club board of director are CEOs from our association. I bet you if I polled half of Minnesotans, they'd have no idea that that's how that leadership shows up each and every day. So amen,
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
I'll help write the stories with you.
Kurt and Emilio, you're speaking my language. We have a saying in Colorado, business is a force for good.
Yeah.
And we believe that, all of you that are in business out there, you're, staying up late at night trying to figure out how to create jobs and create opportunity for the people who work for you. It could be for your supply chain, for your customers, for your community. And it's an honorable thing to be in business. We do a lot of great work.
Just a quick
Yes.
comment. I promise I'll be quick. I think the challenge that we have and that we face at the North Capital Forum and the U.S. Mexico Foundation, and Enrique and I talk about this all the time, is how do we preach to other people that are not the same people that are already convinced of the integration? So
Yeah.
if we take a survey here at the North Capital Forum, I don't know, the absolute majority is going to say, yeah, we should, build North America and make North America great and all this. Then we may disagree on a couple of things, but we need to talk to people that actually don't believe in this, and people that have a negative opinion on Mexico, and bring them here and talk to companies like Polaris, who, because of Mexico, I think, and I know the case very well, they still exist in Minnesota in part because they have facilities in Mexico that are very productive. So I think, how do we speak to other circles and not only, talking among ourselves?
Yeah, absolutely. We'll help you brainstorm on that. I think, we could probably spend quite some time thinking about different stories within our states of trade and supply chain and partnership between the three countries that we'd be happy to bring to the table as well. Shifting, I want to bring Justin back into the conversation, talking about Texas as a border state, particularly around immigration. I know that one of the biggest issues you face, Justin, on behalf of your businesses that you represent, are workforce challenges. How are you addressing that through your partners, the need for skilled labor, unskilled labor, particularly in the context of migration and immigration. I know that's something a big passion for you about creating opportunity in Texas.
It is. It's a top priority for the TBLC. We have 800,000 jobs available in Texas that are going unfilled. 8 million jobs, I believe, is the latest in the United States going unfilled. Workforce is an issue everywhere, and we have immigrants in Texas that are, we don't continue our economy and our economic engine without them. So, but let me start with we have put together our legislature. We pushed for a new community college finance system. More high school students, when they leave high school and are going on to any kind of post-secondary training or education, start in a community college. And so we're working with Business Roundtable in DC and our Community College Association and a Business Higher Education Forum to let employers, for our part of it is to help employers realize that we now have these incentives for the community colleges to build programs for an industry, build programs in it depending on the community college area for one company, and allow those high school graduates and returning someone who's been in a different industry but their job is going away, or it's just not for them anymore. So we're looking at 6-month certificates, but credentials of value where an individual can provide for themselves and their family. And so we're doing that now, going around the state. It's a big state. We started in El Paso and San Antonio and North Texas and Dallas. And then we're moving into East Texas, Houston, the Rio Grande Valley, and throughout the rest of this year. This work is it's incredibly important for the economic health of our state. On the federal policy side, we've been working very closely. Again, we have our trips to DC, our annual fly-in and others, and been very hosted by the embassy in Mexico and the Mexican embassy in DC, and just having those communications. But you're right, the stories are more important because parole in place, and the administration, the Biden administration put the parole in place executive order, and it's been our state and some others have filed a lawsuit to prevent that and stay. And so right now it's in the courts, but those are the kind of things that just make sense. There's no line to stand in for these spouses who are here. We haven't done things correctly as a country in our immigration system. That's not to say there's, every state, every country, I should say, deserves border, some level of security. Every country wants to know who's coming in. And it's better for the individuals. It's better for a humanitarian purpose. It's better for everyone to have a system that works where it's not 7 years, but maybe 7 weeks or 7 months, or where we can have individuals come in who would like to or need to come to the United States or Texas to work and just provide opportunities where it's done in the right way. So I veered off workforce, but it's all tied together.
It's very cool.
Our Texas, the economy, and I dare say most of the entire country, the United States, is not going to be where we need to be without immigrants. Our birth rate's is going down. A lot of the world's birth rate's going down. We need to have a system where we can work together, build relationships, and have the adequate workforce that we need. So we do. So it's a big deal for us because our companies can't grow without it.
Perfect. Thank you, Justin. I think I was surprised too. Many of you may have been in the session with Ambassador Salazar from Colorado, talking about how he's working on workforce integration with higher ed institutions, making sure that we have Mexican students in the United States, that we have United States students in Mexico, to have that cross-border collaboration, is a really big area to build skills and make sure we have the workforce we need and that we're intertwined from the very beginning.
This also goes to what was said earlier, is that the change of dynamics. I was able to work for then Governor George W. Bush, and this is not to be negative for our friends in California, but at the time, they had their their ruling that, in terms of educating school kids and school children in K-12, and our governor, was very proud of to work with him, but maybe never more proud than to say, we're going to educate children who are here. And that kind of thing, I bring that up because every legislative session in Texas, our legislature meets every other year. We have to fight now every year to not have, so that we can fight against bills that want to seek to, abolish, undocumented immigrants, or to not be able to go to K through 12, or to not have our dreamers be able to go to our state schools at the in-state tuition rate. There's legislation that we had to fight, and not just us, but pushing back on that. And it's a shame because we don't need to be that way. It doesn't make common sense, but it is, well, I won't get into that. I think it's good for fundraising, but it's not good for people, and it's not good for business, and it's not good for communities.
When it comes to that workforce, and we had this conversation with our governor, and actually some of us were in DC with the Biden administration, and this is, again, I spent 12 years in politics. I was the Speaker of our House in Minnesota, and the thing that business has gotten a little afraid of, maybe a little reluctant, is to say what we need and what we want. And on the reverse, our friends in government, going to him, and our governor went on a trade mission to Australia, and we had a meeting, and he was talking about how proud he was of it, and this is a great thing. And one of our CEOs raised his hand and said, well, it's great, but none of us are expanding there. We're not selling there. We're not going there. So next time you're going to go on a trade mission, or the next time you're going to develop a new program at the community college, at the technical college, ask us first. And I would say, this is on our side, on the business side, go to them first, okay? Because I'm can be one to say government doesn't always listen and then criticize. But if we don't offer on the inside, my grandma was a teacher, and she said, ignorance is just an excuse until you're willing to let yourself learn. Okay, 50% of that is us learning. Then we have to go out and say to that junior college, the technical school, here's what we need in our workforce. We appreciate all the other programs you have. Please keep them in place if they're significant to your mission. But we need another 1,000 electricians if we're going to house and put up all these data centers around the country, and then the electrical grid to go with it. That's what we need. Then go forward.
And when you approach that through business organizations, you get the sort of cover for the individual businesses. It's not about, it goes from being about a particular business wants things for itself to a broader ask on behalf of, hey, this is the job creators in your state are asking you for a support that we need in order to continue providing livelihoods and tax revenue for the entire state or the entire region.
Yeah, I think this question can be for the whole panel, right? For the whole hour, and we can debate about this. I think what we see in Mexico of companies that we are helping in Mexico is, in some places, factories are getting old, okay? Because young kids in the United States don't want to be in manufacturing. And I think this has a huge positive side. It's part of the success that the United States has had over the years.
Yeah.
And people like to work in services first. And young kids want to, and 10 years ago, I used to kid around this. Well, what are you going to be? YouTuber or influencer or, gamer?
Ballerina, astronaut.
Yeah. And now these are real jobs, hiring tons of people. And maybe not everybody drives a Lamborghini, okay? Those only a few influencers end up in that situation, but a lot of them make more than $30 an hour and working maybe 20 hours a week. So I think what we need to do, just to give you perspective on numbers, the manufacturing, the near-shoring platform in Mexico falls under a program that we call the IMEX program. Constellation Brands, again, operates under the IMEX program. We are 6,500 companies operating under the IMEX program. The United States has 680,000 manufacturing establishments. We are a very small solution for you, but we are part of the solution.
Yeah.
Because if you use a manufacturing facility in Mexico, you're still going to be buying at least 50% of goods made in the United States. If we don't do that, this is the paradigm, right? What is plan B? Plan B is that most likely this company is going to have to shut down and it's going to go under, because the worst thing for a factory is not to have enough people to run it. So you either make a immigration reform that allows for immigrants to come and fill these jobs, which I just don't see happening. So maybe a combination is the best thing, because Mexico is also not the solution for this problem for the United States. It's part of the solution, but it's not 100% of the solution. So I think this is part of where we need to come together and say, okay, we are one North American industrial platform, and create the narrative around this North American industrial platform. And the headquarters can be of Polaris can be, of course, in Minnesota.
Yeah,
but
you're not stealing. You can steal the plant. You're not stealing the headquarters.
Yeah, they're going to Colorado.
I talked to Mike Speedson before I left. He said hi, but
And let me rein it back, and I want to have you give a few more comments, Emilio. We've got a little bit more time left. I want to talk about those solutions. How do we strengthen our ties? And to your point, thought leaders in a room is interesting. Having some intentionality as we go forward is more interesting, because then we've got some action items to go forward. So Emilio, as you're thinking about, there might be some businesses here from the United States, from Canada, some of us who represent a lot of businesses, you just gave a concrete way for us to potentially think about strengthening our regional economies. And perhaps you want to let us know how to do that. And then I'm going to ask my peers as well, what's a concrete way, or what have you seen, either a story or a potential that you see that's a takeaway on how we can strengthen our regional economies together?
Yeah, I'll be very, very quick. I think that we need to start doing it by regions. So the first thing is Texas and Mexico. If we don't start this narrative between Texas and Mexico, then it's going to be very difficult to do it with Minnesota. And I don't think this happens between Mexico City and Washington, D.C. That narrative is political, and we are under an election, substantial election, relevant election every 2 years. Fortunately, because that means that we live in a democracy, but it has some collateral damage. So I think if we start saying, okay, how do we start the narrative of Nuevo León, Coahuila, and Texas? And then we say, you know what, this makes sense. So that would be my initial comment, and I will take your business card when we leave so we can start the conversation with Texas and start getting on it.
Perfect. We'll meet at cocktails in a few minutes. Yeah, perfect. Pat, any story you can tell from Tennessee, or a solution that you want to put forward?
Yeah, I think this question is interesting because, in my experience, the idea of regionalism is ascending. It used to be, and my colleagues can chime in if this is the case, but within our states, the conversation used to be very much focused on zero-sum competition. We have to fight. We want a new auto plant or something, and we have to make sure that we're getting it, and Kentucky does not get it. And that's changing. There are several reasons for that, but we've seen it change from zero-sum to a cooperative systemic view where both can win. Both you and another state, if you're getting investment. So it's not just going out for what you need. You can do what you excel at. We can do what we excel at. We can do business together, and we can all win together. There is a story. One of the state officials, top state officials in my state, many weeks ago told me that he is not concerned about a neighboring state winning one large particular new investment for an assembly facility because he's confident that even if the other neighboring state wins that assembly facility, our state is positioned well, both geographically and in terms of what we can do to receive some upstream economic development wins for the suppliers that have to supply that assembly plant. So, adopting this sort of comparative advantage mindset, I think, is useful because it gets rid of the no holds barred, everybody there must be always a winner and a loser, competitive mindset. And I think this sense of regional collaboration makes a lot of sense right now for two reasons. One is because the mobility of labor and talent has accelerated tremendously, even before the pandemic, especially during the pandemic, and it has continued after the pandemic. And also the mobility of capital has accelerated. So when, the inputs that you need from a people and a finance perspective are accelerating their ability to move around to wherever the best thing is, it makes sense for you to realize, okay, the other guy may have to win once in a while, but so that we can help the other guy with business of our own.
Yeah, well said. And you're all in growth states, I think, which is nice to know. Colorado, of course, is as well. We all have strong economies. Kurt, back to you. Closing comments on where do you see some regional partnership that's already happening in Minnesota as an example of a company, or where do you see potential partnership?
Well, and I agree. The conversation is great. It's the action items leaving, and I think that's, I'll be happy, and not just because it's really, really nice and sunny and not going to snow here, but come back and then come back with purpose, right? Like, here's what we're going to fix, and if it is, we're going to just fix Mexico and America's immigration on workforce visas. Let's not eat the entire elephant all at one sitting. Let's start with one or two bites and make that the purposeful mission of here's what we're going to come out of this with. Then we can work on reshoring. Then we can work on updating manufacturing, because the thing that I've seen, and Polaris is a great example, and they have an amazing CEO about, we don't like the risk, and it's the cheap labor and the cheap costs that we had in China or India. It's just not worth it, which I don't know if it's come to an ROI in their minds, or if it's just, it's just such a hassle and it's so unpredictable. And I think bringing that stability and predictability from our standpoint as North America, not just America or Mexico or Canada, I think is going to make us even more dynamic. And then, to Justin and to Pat's point, it's not a competition amongst states or countries. It's about North America and the world. And that capital, the development will come here. I would tell you, one of my son just graduated from high school. One of his buddies has no interest at all in going to college. He said, I see how many windmills are going up and how many solar panels are starting. He goes, I'm going to take over my dad's electrician company. He goes, I'll be retired by the time I'm 40 when all you college guys are still working. So there's a mindset in that youth, and we need to capture that as well. Not just wait for, okay, well, they'll eventually get old enough where they understand our ideas. They're there. They're ahead of us. And something we haven't talked about, they're willing to use AI to get smarter faster with it. And that's a really critical, important, and not be afraid of that, but also just be careful enough when you harness it that it's the right way.
Yeah, absolutely. Justin, final remarks, and then Emilio.
Just very briefly, I just want to say we accept, the council accepts, and we'll try to do. Earlier, I hadn't thought about this in a long time. The Board of Governors Conference went away, I guess, in 2012 when Governor Bush was then. In Brownsville, we worked on one that was part of my job, and that's government, but business was there too. But those kinds of models, Nuevo Leon's a powerhouse. And I shouldn't go into, so is Tamaulipas and other, the whole region is wonderful with great, universities and great business. And, it's good. We should have midwinter conferences or midsummer conferences or work sessions even.
Yep.
So we would be happy to do that, because, we all have to, come together.
Perfect.
That's how we grew in the first place in many cases.
Yep.
And this current situation right now is just, I think it's bad. It's very bad, but I think it could crumble away when we build more relationships quicker than maybe we think. Maybe I'm just being optimistic, but you have to be.
You gotta like optimists. Emilio?
Yeah, I think the one thing that we haven't talked about, and I mention it because I had the opportunity to be in Nashville this Monday. And I hadn't been there in, I think, 12 years. Amazing. Mm-hmm. And the level of energy and things like that. But economic development has to follow what people want to do, what people are passionate about. And I think Nashville, at least from what I got to see, and I was on a logistics conference on a convention center that you get lost in it, right?
It has grass on the roof.
Yeah. So it's an amazing place. But the music industry has to be in Nashville and will be in Nashville regardless of what a politician says, because people love it and you breathe it and all that. That's why I don't think this obsession with industrializing the south of Mexico will ever work. I think you cannot put a factory in San Cristobal de las Casas in Oaxaca. I think it's the worst mistake we ever made, because somebody in Mexico City had the idea that, yeah, we should put what I call the Monterrey vaccine on every single city in Mexico. It doesn't work because the DNA of people is different. And it's not about the cost of labor, by the way, it's not cheaper. It's about the infrastructure around it.
Yep.
So I think we need to listen to our young people and then try to accompany economic development with what people want to do. That takes a little bit of the stress of labor mobility out. It doesn't go away. Then people come. I'm sure people are leaving. You're not having to convince people to move to Nashville if they are in the music industry.
The next city you need to come to is Memphis.
There you go.
You
So
heard it here.
I think it takes a little bit out of that, and then the business bloom and entrepreneurship and SMEs. And I still don't believe that every SME has to be a Fortune 500 company, because the owners don't want to be a Fortune 500 company. We go in industry, we're looking for suppliers and say, okay, here is this new contract, this $9 million of spend a year, and say, hey, I'm doing great. I don't want your problems, right? So I think a lot of things to talk about.
Absolutely.
But again, projects and execution, I think then we transform little by little.
Yep.
And so but I am very optimistic, and I have to say I'm optimistic about Mexico as part of this, as part of the team North America.
Absolutely. We talked, and some of you answered our poll question. We talked about issues like regulatory framework is one of the biggest challenges, workforce, lack of capital, lots of different issues, infrastructure. And we didn't get into every issue, of course, today. And as those of you who are in the private sector know, business is a very complex issue. But I'm really grateful that we brought up the concept of business as a force for good, making sure that we tell the stories of what business leaders are doing for their community, not just in creating jobs, but taking risk and the innovation that we need to make sure that we continue to grow the pie. I think that was your point, Pat. There doesn't have to be a winner and loser when we think about regional partnerships. Let's grow the pie the North American way, as we've learned from Emilio and Enrique at this wonderful conference. So join me in thanking our panelists today.
Thank you. Thank you.